Hello, good morning from Hamburg and good evening to New Zealand.
Good morning and good evening to you as well.
It's a sunny morning here in Hamburg and we are looking forward to your talk. Let me say something, it's great that you are here in time and I will say some more words after Guy's talk, okay? And so I think, Guy, the stage is yours.
Excellent, thank you. So good morning, everyone. I'm going to be giving a relatively comprehensive guide to contributing to Silverstripe CMS. Some of these slides are going to have links in them. I'll post my slide deck on Slack after I've presented. So for those of you who don't know who I am, I'm Guy Sartorelli. You might know me from the community Slack, from Stack Overflow, from the forums, from GitHub. Basically anywhere that I interact with the Silverstripe CMS community, I use this profile picture you see on the left. I'm a senior product developer at Silverstripe, so I work full-time on developing the Silverstripe CMS. So if you've created a pull request to a supported module in the last year or so, there's a pretty good chance that I've at least glanced at it, if not reviewed and merged it, or rejected it in some cases as well. I'm also a Silverstripe core committer. That's a group of individuals made up of not only Silverstripe staff members, but also community members who have been recognized for their contributions to the open source Silverstripe CMS project. And before I was employed by Silverstripe, I've also committed several bug fixes and feature enhancements. So I do know what the process is like from both sides of the fence. With that in mind, I'm going to be talking about two topics today. The first is how contributions to the open source supported modules are currently managed, and I'll go into a bit of some of the improvements that we want to make along the way. And the second thing is about how you can contribute to the open source Silverstripe CMS ecosystem. I've also got a little bit of a contribution FAQ at the end. So first up, managing contributions. I'll start off by covering the current state of contribution managements for Silverstripe CMS core and supported modules, which is that we merge community-created pull requests on an ad hoc basis. There's not really a strong process around when or how many we should review, etc. There is a sentiment in the community, I'm very aware of this, that pull requests don't get looked at. So in some people's minds, it's not worth raising them, and hopefully I'll address that appropriately in this talk. The CMS squad, so that's the people developing CMS full-time, the commercial branch of the CMS, if you will, is just 4 people. And with the core committers, that adds an additional 9 people, and we're the only people at the moment with merge powers. So 13 people in total who can merge your pull requests when you create them. And while the core committers have been involved with discussions about contribution management and the direction that the CMS is headed in, recently not many of them have been actively reviewing and merging pull requests. So there's not very many people looking at the pull requests, and there's not a clear path to giving that power to more people at the moment. Now let's look at some statistics, and we'll start by looking at the different groups of people that are creating pull requests and how those pull requests have been treated over the last 5 years. Looking at the top 2 graphs, we can see that there's a very clear correlation between pull requests created on the left and pull requests merged on the top right. So the number of pull requests merged seems to be very closely related to the number of pull requests created, regardless of who's creating the pull request. And that's a good sign, but we can also see in the bottom right graph that there's a number of pull requests left open that is much higher for community-created pull requests than for anyone else. That's the blue line there at the top of that bottom right graph. So there's clearly an imbalance there where the community-created pull requests are being left open more often than for any other group. We can also see, as you might expect, the red line there is the CMS squad at Silverstripe, and you can see that there's a lot more pull requests created for that group and less left open. That makes sense because we're paid to do this full time, right? But considering we're a 4-person team right now, that also seems like there's a little bit of an imbalance there. You'd expect the red line and the blue line to be a little bit closer together than that. Now let's look at how old pull requests are. In the top 2 graphs, we're looking at how old pull requests are by the time they get merged. So on the top left, we have the average age of merged pull requests for a given year. And we can see that in the past, there were a lot of older pull requests being merged, and that recently we've been merging mostly newer pull requests. That means that there's a quicker turnaround time for newly created pull requests that get merged, which is a good thing, but it also means that there might be some older pull requests that just aren't getting any attention at the moment. Now, on the top right, we have a plot of all of the ages of all merged pull requests, and that gives essentially another view into the same data. And again, we can see that recently we've been merging newer pull requests and not so many older ones. On the bottom 2 graphs, we're looking at pull requests that are still open. And specifically, we're looking at how long these pull requests have been open. So these haven't been merged or closed. Another way to think about these 2 graphs at the bottom is how many pull requests which were created each year are still open today. And there's some really old pull requests still open, so there's definitely some improvement to be made to how we treat stale pull requests. There's also a lot of pull requests open from 2021. You can see that large hump on the bottom right graph. That time period lines up with when the CMS squad was down to just 2 or 3 developers. And it tells me that we haven't merged, that if we haven't merged a closed, sorry, it tells me that if we haven't merged or closed a pull request after a couple of months or so, it just kind of sits there and gets stale. So we're not looking at older pull requests at the moment. It's essentially the same things that we learned from the top 2 graphs there. Now let's take a closer look at pull requests that the community has been making over the last 5 years. So this is specifically only pull requests created by community members, not by core committers or by the CMS squad. And there is a very clear trend here where over time, less pull requests are being made, and as a result, less pull requests are being merged. There's obviously a number of factors which play into this. For example, some features that might have been introduced into core in the past are now being created as modules, potentially. But it's also likely that the sentiment that I mentioned earlier of pull requests not being given their due attention is coming into play and causing less people to create pull requests. Regardless of the cause, there's very clearly less contributions being made and being merged. We can also see that there's a growing number of pull requests being left open. That is the yellow line there. So it's not just that older pull requests aren't being dealt with. There's also some newer pull requests that could be merged or possibly should be closed that just aren't being dealt with. Finally, we can look at that same data again as a percentage of the total number of created pull requests. And we can see that over time, it's the same trend as before. There's a decrease in pull requests merged, and there's an increase of pull requests that are left open. So community pull requests have been slowly losing momentum. Andrew Paxley, that's a member of the community who made some great contributions for Silverstripe CMS 5.1. When he made those contributions, he said, definitely one of the things that kept me moving on the PRs is the feedback. Momentum is really important to getting things committed. So how can we get that momentum going and keep it going? So here's some things that we're looking to do to improve things. I want to make it very clear here that these are aspirational. They're things that we want to do. I'm not promising that any of this will be done or giving any sort of time frame. But that said, here's what we're hoping to do going forward. We're looking at introducing 2 new roles. These are roles that will be held by members of the community, similar to the current core committers group, so that there's less reliance on the commercial support provided by Silverstripe to get things merged in. The refiner role that I've mentioned here is for making sure that issues and pull requests have enough information. So that by the time someone goes to implement a bug fix, if we're looking at an issue, or if by the time someone goes to review a pull request, there's enough information that the person can just get straight into it. The reviewer role will be for reviewing and merging pull requests. We'll probably initially have this role looking at low-risk pull requests first, and we'll most likely be tapping people on the shoulder, specifically inviting them to the role so that we can work out all the kinks and figure out how to get this role working nicely. And then once we're happy with how things are working, we'll look at opening it up a bit more. But this proposal is currently being reviewed, so if we do go ahead with this, then there'll likely be a blog post with more details about it. So keep an eye out on the blog post for more about it, these roles. Looking into how we'll deal with stale issues and pull requests. So as you saw in those graphs earlier, there's a lot of older pull requests that just haven't been dealt with, and we want to figure out a good way to not only resolve that situation for now, but also make sure it doesn't happen in the future. That might mean that we automatically close issues or pull requests after a certain period of time, and that period of time might be shorter for low impact issues and longer for higher impact ones. So you saw in the graphs earlier that we're just not dealing with older pull requests very well at all. So we want to deal with that in some way. We're not sure how yet. That might mean that we'll automatically close issues after a certain period of time, and that period of time maybe will be shorter for low impact issues and longer for higher impact ones. For pull requests, obviously, we wouldn't want to close a pull request that we haven't looked at, but if we've asked for changes and they haven't been made, then maybe we'll close them after a certain period of time. And that's something that we're looking into, but we're very early stages on that, so don't look for changes in the immediate future. And then templates for GitHub issues and pull requests. At the moment, only Silverstripe Framework has a template for its issues. We want to start rolling that out on other modules, and that's in our backlog. So at some point in the future, you'll see issues on the other repositories as well. Beyond that, your ideas and recommendations are welcome. If you have ideas about how we can improve management of community contributions, please send them through to community@silverstripe.org. Or if for whatever reason you don't want to send an email, you can create a forum post or message me on Slack, and we'll look at your suggestion and see what happens from that. Now let's talk about how you can contribute, the main point of the talk. Bear in mind that while I'll be mostly covering these in the context of core and supported modules, these are useful contributions to make anywhere in the Silverstripe CMS open source ecosystem. So any community modules that you use, these same things that I'll talk about apply. I'll be talking you through how to do most of this. So here are some of the things: is update documentation. I'm very aware that some of our documentation's out of date. Some of it might also not be clear, or there might be information that's missing. So if you notice any of that, please correct it. Translations, Silverstripe CMS is used all over the world, as very obvious with this conference happening right now. If it hasn't been localized for a country you need it for, you can provide that localization. You can also report and fix bugs, improve or implement new features, provide new modules, as James talked about yesterday, or maintain a currently unmaintained module. So let's go through some of those. As I mentioned, there's likely some documentation that's out of date or missing or not clear, or it has typos or problems with code examples. Whatever the case may be, you can help improve the documentation. So that's both the developer docs and it's also the user help guides. Bear in mind that lessons are out of scope for the moment. We're still deciding how we want to handle that to make sure that we have and keep updated getting started documentation. That the lessons are so out of date that we basically have to start from scratch. So we're not looking for recommendations on those or for the information and architecture for now. We want to make sure that we do that from a holistic view and make sure that we do it right. But for any other documentation changes, your pull requests are absolutely valuable. So please bear with me for this. Developers, especially experienced ones, this section might be a bit obvious for you, but I want to make sure that anyone who wants to update documentation has the tools to do so. Remember, this goes for the user help guides as well. So it might be a content author or someone like that who has a reason to update the documentation. I want to make sure that they're able to do so. That said, I'm going to blow through this part pretty quickly. The point isn't that you remember all of these steps, but rather that these slides are available as a resource if you need to do this later on. So, all you need to do is go to a page in the documentation. There'll be an Edit on GitHub button or link at the very bottom. So you click on that. If you haven't got a fork already, GitHub will prompt you to make one. And if you don't know what that means, don't worry about it. Just click fork this repository. Then take a note of what branch it's on. So that will be near the top of the page. It's the 5.1 that I've got circled on this slide. Take note of that. That's going to be important for later. And then make whatever change it is, whether it's fixing a typo, grammatical error, making something a little bit clearer, whatever it is. So this is for simple single-page changes. These are essentially the steps that you take. Once you've made your changes, click Commit Changes at the top right of the page. Make sure that your commit message starts with the word doc and then has a brief description of the intention of your change. In this case, I'm adding a missing word. Add a description if you need to add more context about why you're making your change, and then click Propose Changes. Then you'll come to a screen that looks a bit like this. You get a last chance to double check that you don't have any typos. And this is where that branch that I mentioned earlier comes into play. So it will start off in the default branch, but as we noticed before, 5.1 was the branch that we wanted to make the change for. So we just need to make sure that we are changing the correct branch there, and then click Create Pull Request. And then you get a last chance to double check your the message that you made earlier for your commit. That's pulled through to this screen, so you just make sure that's all correct, and then click Create Pull Request again. Some changes do affect more than one page, and in that case you'll need to do things slightly differently. So I'm going to demo that one because I think it will be a little bit quicker that way. Bear with me. So you'll need to go to the documentation repository on GitHub, click Fork to create a fork on GitHub if you haven't done so already. And then because it's a live demo, GitHub will be a pain in the butt. There we go. So you'll create a fork. If it says that you've already got a fork, then you can just click your profile icon on the top right, go Your Repositories, and find the repository that way. Because I don't have a fork yet, I'm going to create one here. Make sure you untick the copy the whatever branch only thing, because that branch might not be the correct branch that we need to change. Again, earlier we saw it was 5.1, and click Create Fork. Then click on any file in here. It doesn't matter what file it is. Sorry, change the branch first. So 5.1, as we saw earlier. Click on any file, doesn't matter which file it is. Click on this arrow next to edit, and then github.dev. This is going to open a browser version of VS Code, which basically allows us to edit multiple pages at once in a single pull request. It's a very easy way to manage it. We'll just give it a moment to load up. So once it's finished loading, there we go. You see all of the files here. So go ahead, open whatever file it was that you were looking at, edit it, make the changes on all of the files that are relevant, and then click the source control button here. And then we'll add in a commit message like before. It needs to start with doc, and then some explanation of what your changes are. And then you should be given yes, sorry. I needed to create an extra branch here. These instructions are not very good because it's a live demo. I've screwed something up. But in any case, you'll need to go through steps similar to this. There's something that I'm missing here. So if you get stuck at this point, just go to the public Slack and ask for help, basically. But if you had done it correctly, which I haven't, then you'll be able to commit and push. And then you'll go down here to GitHub. You'll be able to create a new pull request. Select the correct branch like before, and then click this green create button. So there was just one step in there somewhere that I was missing. I'll make sure that when I upload the slide deck that it is correct. Let me go back now to the slides. There we go. So translations. Silverstripe CMS is used, of course, as I mentioned before, all over the world. But the default language for new strings that we add is English. So if you need translations for another language, you can submit those yourself. Bear in mind that we don't really review the translations. We trust that you're not being malicious, and that you as the community will fix problems as you see them. Here are two links in the slide that will be useful to you. Explore will let you see the status of translations. You can click through to any given module to see how much of it has been translated. So let's go and have a look at what that looks like. We'll look at the admin module, for example, and we can see the percentage of these various languages, and then click join this project if you want to submit your own translations for something. That will prompt you to create a new account if you haven't already got one. And then there's a lot of information that you can find here, but the main thing you want to do is click translate. Most modules will have a YAML resource and a JSON resource. The YAML being for PHP translations, as you'll probably be familiar with, and JSON for the JavaScript ones. We'll want to go all resources because that means that we don't have to worry about what the source is. We're only here interested in the translations. And then select a language up here. Let's pretend we are translating something in German. If you're fixing a translation, then stay under this all section, and then you can search for the string that you're after, or you can click untranslated and just go ham translating all of the stuff that hasn't been translated yet. So you can select any given string, type your translation here in this box, and then click Save Translation. And then at some point after you've done that, we'll go through and we've got a manual task where we pull the translations from Transifex and we bring them through to the codebase. Bugs. If you find bugs, please let us know. Before you report a bug, make sure that you rule out any customizations. So double check that you can reproduce it in a fresh installation of Silverstripe CMS. Look for any existing issues on GitHub, even closed ones. Someone quite possibly has already reported this bug in the past, and there might be workarounds or solutions that will help you. If there is not an existing issue, or if the existing issue was closed but it doesn't solve your problem, that's when you can create a new issue on GitHub. Include as much information as you can. Include all of the steps that you can to reproduce it from a fresh installation. I can't stress enough how important that is. It makes it a lot easier to reproduce your issue if you include clear steps that are really specific. Don't just say, create a page, but take us through all of the steps, step by step, of how you can reproduce the issue. And then it's obviously going to be a lot easier for someone to come along and fix the bug for you if they can reproduce it in the first place, right? Make sure you list the module version that you found the bug on, and if there are any other modules that are taking part in the bug, then list the versions of those as well. And then refer to the documentation. I've got a link here for more information. There's a lot more there about what to report and what information to include that goes beyond what I have in this slide. But of course, pull requests are a lot more useful than just reporting a problem. If you can fix the bug, then your pull request is very welcome, and I'll do the CMS squad and core committers, and hopefully eventually the reviewer team will do our best to solve the problem for you, or to review your pull request. But just remember that there's not very many hands employed to fix these bugs full time. There's just 4 of us. So again, I think max or was it Smack, said in the keynote that the community is like the fourth squad member. That's where you guys come in. Keep in mind as well that the less impactful a bug is, the less likely someone else is going to fix it. So again, if you find a bug and it's important for you, then please fix it yourself and then create a pull request. That's the most surefire way for it to be fixed. I'm not going to go through the minutiae of how to make the code change or how to submit the pull request. James did a really good talk about how to do that with modules yesterday, and it basically covered the whole lot. The core and supported modules are modules, so most of those same steps that he covered yesterday apply. That said, if you do need any help, that's what Slack, Stack Overflow, and the forums are for. When you do make a pull request, just make sure that you test your fix in a working environment. And once you've made the fix, make a fork of the repository and commit your changes to the fork, and then create a pull request from there. And I'll show you how to do that in a little bit. The rules for creating the pull request are basically the same as the process that I showed with documentation, except when you create your commit, instead of using the doc prefix in your commit message, use the fix prefix. And again, this is all mentioned in the documentation on the contributing code. I've got a link here, so take a look at that in my slide deck once I've finished and once I've posted the link to that on Slack. I'm going to now walk you through some of the things that commonly trip people up when contributing to Silverstripe open source projects. And in doing so, I'm going to refer to a tool called DDev. DDev is an abstraction for Dockerized development environments. So check that out if you're looking for an easy way to set up and manage local development environments. And there's a couple of people in the community that are using it as well, so you can always ask on Slack for help with that. One thing that commonly trips people up is trying to build out the JavaScript and CSS files. We use NVM, which is Node Version Manager, to make sure that contributors use the same version of NPM and the same version of Yarn. So if you're using NPM and Yarn natively, you're basically on your own to make sure you have the right version. I strongly recommend using Node Version Manager. DDev has that installed for you already, so if you're using DDev, you don't even have to worry about it. To build out the JavaScript and CSS, make sure that you install and swap to the right version of NPM. So that's the nvm install and nvm use commands here. Make sure you install Yarn if you haven't done so already, and then run yarn install, which will download all of the JavaScript dependencies. If you're working in a module that is not Silverstripe admin, then you'll also need to go into the Silverstripe admin repository in your local machine and run yarn install there as well. That's because some modules will reference libraries that Silverstripe admin exposes as Webpack externals, or they might reference direct components that Silverstripe admin implements, and the tests will fail if you haven't run yarn install there. So you not only need to run yarn install for the module that you're actively working on, but also for Silverstripe admin. And then while you're developing, you can use yarn watch or yarn dev, and that will build out the files for you. And then once you're ready to commit the change that you've made, run yarn build, and that's going to lint your JavaScript. That will run the tests, and that will build out the distribution files. And then obviously commit those files as part of your pull request. Writing tests is also something that trips people up. I'll cover when to write tests later on, but almost any change that you make should result in new tests being added or existing tests being updated. A lack of tests is a very common cause for a pull request losing momentum. But for the most part, you can just copy the existing tests and change them a little bit to test the behavior that you're making. So there's a few different types of tests that exist. Jest tests, which are on the left here, that's for testing JavaScript, mostly React. There's not very many jest tests for the entwine logic. We don't ask for those as often, mostly because it's not very often that JavaScript changes are made. But if you are making changes there, then just make sure you have a look at the jest tests. It's in the client source directory, and then it will be right next to the files that you're editing. So in this case, it's the component, the accordion component. There's a tests directory and a couple of files in there. We use bhat for behavioral tests. It's really good for testing behavior from a user perspective, and it's mostly used for testing complex behaviors that are hard to unit test, or for testing JavaScript code that's hard to test with Jest. So it's mostly entwined stuff that gets tested in bhat tests. And that's in the tests directory. Go to bhat, go to features, and then there's some feature files there. And then for PHP unit and functional tests, that's what you're going to be dealing with most of the time. And there's some really good documentation for how to write those. But again, you should be able to mostly copy what already exists and change that to test your changes. And if you get stuck, of course, ask for help on Slack or on the forums, and we're absolutely happy to help you out. You also need to make sure that you can run these tests locally. It's no good to write a test and then just hope and guess that it's going to work. So again, this is where ddev is really useful, but if you're doing it, if you're not using ddev and you're just testing natively, then we're happy to try and help you out with that as well. For running the test, there are some extra dependencies that you're going to need, and those are packaged up very nicely in the Silverstripe recipe testing module. So the types of tests that you need to be able to run natively, locally, sorry, other than the JavaScript ones, which will run automatically when you run yarn build, first off, linting PHP. So to do this, you can just use the PHP code sniffer or PHP-CS. If you're using ddev, then it's a little bit tidier, as I've mentioned here, because you only just have to run the one command, and it will lint your source code tests and config.php. Whereas if you're doing it natively, it's either a very long command or you have to run the command for each path that you want to lint. With PHP unit tests, your database user needs to have permissions that allow for creating new databases. If you're using ddev, then that's very easy. You just swap the database username and password in your .env file to root from the default DB. And then if you're running tests natively, just run vendor bin PHP unit and give it the path to the class or folder that you want to run the tests for. And then there's an example here as well for running them with ddev. And again, I'm blowing through this pretty quickly because you're not going to remember this, but you'll remember that the slides exist and the examples are all here for later when you need them. Finally, for bhat tests, again, your database user needs to have permissions that allow creating new databases. That's the same as with unit tests. You'll also need some way for bhat to control a browser to run the tests in. So if you're doing that natively, then I recommend you use Chrome driver because that's quite easy to set up. But if you're using ddev, then there's stuff that exists for you. So there's some simple install steps for using the Selenium 2 driver with ddev. You just need to add the extra composer package as a dev dependency, as shown here. Tell ddev to install the Selenium driver for you, and then run ddev restart, and you're pretty much good to go. There's also a small change that you will need to make to your bhat.yaml file, and the ddev docs tell you exactly what change that is, but I've got it here in this slide for you as well. Regardless of whether you're running bhat natively or with a tool like ddev, you probably only want to test one or two scenarios at a time, which will be the ones that you're writing for your test, for your pull request. So you can add a tag to the line above features or scenarios that you want to run. So here I've got an example where the tag is called test me. And then when you run vendor bin bhat, you tell it what module you're running tests for, and you add the tags there. So it's really easy to just say, I just want to run this one test. Okay, so there are some other things that you can do once you've made your pull request that will make it more successful and keep the momentum going. And these all go doubly, they're all doubly true for if you're enhancing or implementing new features. Bug fixes tend to be a little bit more straightforward. So make sure that you link to an issue from your pull request. And if an issue doesn't exist already, please create one. It provides a lot of really good context for the pull request, including reproduction steps. And it means that your pull request description can be just purely about the solution in your pull request and doesn't need to talk about the problem. The issue is also a really good way to discuss the problem itself in a way that doesn't necessarily relate to your specific solution. And it means that if your pull request for whatever reason doesn't get merged and gets closed, then we still have a record of the issue, and someone else can come along with a different solution, or maybe you can come up with a different solution later on. We also track issues internally. We don't track pull requests directly. So if there's no issue related to your pull request, then your pull request just might not be noticed. You should also link to the pull request from the issue. So this is linking the other way around. Because again, we track issues internally. If there's no link to your pull request from the issue, we might not know that there's anything to review for that issue. We might think that we'd have to implement our own fix, and therefore it might be less likely to be looked at in a timely fashion. You need to explain your implementation. So if there's anything that could be controversial or which isn't immediately self-explanatory in the context of the pull request, please add a comment to your own pull request explaining why you've done what you've done. The less clarification that we need to ask for when we're reviewing, the easier it will be to review your pull request and the quicker it will be to get merged. Also, make sure that you've included appropriate test coverage, as I've mentioned. If we can see that you've added tests and the tests are passing, we're going to be a lot more inclined to actually review the pull request because there's a higher chance that it works, right? Please also respond to comments or make changes that we request in a timely manner. Otherwise, once someone starts viewing your pull request, if you don't respond quickly, then we're going to move on to something else, and it might be quite a while before we come back and look and see that you've see whether you've made any changes. And then finally, if you have a good reason to not make a requested change, then please explain that reason very clearly and as completely as you can. If you can show a precedent as well for your argument in the existing code base, then it's going to be a lot easier to accept your reasoning, and then we can move on from whatever that suggestion was. Okay, so we've talked about documentation, we've talked about translations and bug fixes. How about implementing and improving implementing new features and improving existing ones? You guys are developing with Silverstripe CMS all the time. You either run into roadblocks or you implement the same things over and over again, or you hear the same complaints from end users. You're in a really good position, arguably a better position than me, where you have an idea of what features can be improved and what new features should be implemented that will provide good value for real-world projects. That said, any non-trivial implementations should be discussed first in a GitHub issue. When you create the issue, make it really clear that you want to implement the feature and you're just looking for feedback. Create the issue with some really clearly defined use case. Consider alternative implementations, explain why you want to do things the way you want to do them, but then also be open to any suggestions that we come up with. If you just rush in with a pull request, then you might end up spending a lot of time working on an approach that just doesn't end up getting merged. So if it's a good feature that you want to implement, but it's going to be a bit of a larger piece of work, then please create an issue first. And again, make it clear that you're willing to put in the work to implement it. But of course, not everything belongs in core. We need to make sure that the things we're adding in core belong in core and make new modules for things that should be modules. I'm pretty sure, yeah, someone's already talked about that. James Cocker gave an excellent talk about this yesterday. If you missed that, give it a chance, give it a watch once it's uploaded to YouTube after the conference. It was a fantastic talk, and it meant that I don't have to spend time talking about it. So I'll move on. We dropped support for a bunch of modules when we released CMS 5. You can see that in the 5.0 changelog. There were already a bunch of non-supported modules in the Silverstripe GitHub organization before that as well, and you guys can maintain those if you want to. Just email community@silverstripe.org, let us know you're keen, and we will work something out. Lastly, I don't actually have time to go through the FAQ that I've written up, but again, I'm going to link to these slides in Slack afterwards. So I'm just going to blast through these slides, take a look at the slides afterwards. Finally, the power of open source is the power of the people. The more of us that band together and contribute to the Silverstripe CMS open source ecosystem, the better things will become in the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Guy. Thanks for the great talk. And it's really good that it was a really good idea to have this talk. And here are 70 people or 75 that really want to contribute to Silverstripe to work with you together. And I really think that your talk will help contributing.
That's the hope, yeah. As you saw in the graphs at the beginning, we've noticed a bit of a decline over time, so hopefully this will get a bit more motivation to you guys to contribute a bit more.
Yeah, thank you very much. And before we go to Mjolnir, I have to say a few things. But first, thank you, Guy, again.